a statement. Keen to hear your views on that after 8. And then after 9, Sylvie Berman, who was French ambassador to the UK, or to the Court of St James, I should say, from 2014 to 2017. She's written a book called Au revoir Britannia, some fairly trenchant things she says about Brexit. She'll be joining me in the studio in the 9 o'clock hour. But in this hour, it's another trade union leader we've got in the studio with us. We speak regularly to Dave Ward from the Communications Workers Union. We've had various other union leaders on over the course of the last year or so, and today is the turn of Mick Lynch, General Secretary of the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union, the RMT. Mick, welcome to the programme. Now, the reason we wanted you to come in today is obviously because of the strike ballot that took place this week, and the fact that there's going to be a strike on London Underground on the 6th of June? I think I'm right in saying that just after the bank holiday. And I want to get callers to call in and, I was going to say, hold you to account for it. You're not a politician, are you? But I think it's quite interesting to hear from the horse's mouth rather than maybe some of the more lurid articles that we read in the press. So if you have a question for Mick Lynch, General Secretary of the RMT, over the course of the next hour, the number to call 0345 6060 973. You can text your question to 84850, and you can watch us also on Global Player or the LBC YouTube channel. Mick, first of all, let's talk about these strikes and the reasons for them. Why? First of all, let's start with the London Underground one. What's that all about?
Well, the London Underground, in the form of the Mayor and the company that he controls, have got a plan to make drastic changes to working practices, staffing levels, and also the pension scheme that's been in place for a considerable time. That's because of the financial crisis that's been brought about because of COVID and the lack of travellers over the last 2 years. And he's had to go to the government and seek funding, which I think ends again on the 20th of June. It's a hand-to-mouth, almost monthly existence. And one of the things he's committed to with the government is to make a programme of changes, reforms they would call it, we would call it cuts. And the initial one that they brought to us is 600 jobs coming out of station grades. And that we think that's the first instalment. And there's a lot of complicated outcomes and side effects of that, but essentially it's 600 job cuts, and we obviously are opposed to job cuts as a trade union for the members, and that's the fundamental reason behind that. It's very similar in fact to the National Rail dispute as well, because there's a similar agenda there.
On the 600 job cuts, as I understand it, there aren't going to be any compulsory redundancies. It would be through natural wastage. Is that right?
Yes, but the effects on the staff of having to move about the system and their start and finish times and all the conditions that go with it are unacceptable. And it's cuts, continuous cuts that we've had since their programme Fit for the Future, where they shut all the ticket offices. They made a series of redundancies then. And our members feel that they're being pushed around the system too much. It's disrupting their work-life balance. And they want a deal about that where they get some guarantees.
So just give us a few examples of what the effect on someone's working life.
Well, they'll have to travel big distances to get across the system, and they will be moved around the system at the drop of a hat. They won't have a home station, and their working lives will be disrupted to an unacceptable level. They've already given a lot of flexibility through the previous reform packages that the company wanted, and they find that unacceptable, that their work-life balance will be disturbed in that way.
Are you saying that somebody who has normally been, say, I don't know, to pick a station at random, has a job at Stratford, that they might be moved to Earl's Court?
Well, they will be, and they'll have to travel in their own time, so they might be living out in Essex, because a lot of London transport workers don't live.
We all have to do that.
We have to do it, but we've got an agreement where their current home base is. So if you set your life up to work in a particular location, and then you have another hour added to your journey, you might want to say about that. And it's because of the cuts that they're having to do that. You normally get a choice about where you want to work, and if you've made your domestic arrangements, made your childcare arrangements, made whatever stuff's going on in your life, and let's not forget that our members do super unsocial hours on the Underground. They start extremely early and they can finish extremely late, and they have a mixture of shifts all around the clock and all around the calendar. So that's a disruption to their lives that they find unacceptable. And we think there's other means to achieve what they want, which includes the proper staffing levels. It's only because they're cutting the staff levels that they have to do this, and it breaks the current agreements.
But when you take a job, do you? I mean, is it written into someone's contract that they will always be working at Stratford?
Well, it's written into their contract and their terms and conditions what the limits of the movement can be, and that's common on the railway, because the railway's a big network, and you can do very long distances,
I
even
can
on the
understand
London
if it's
Underground.
sort of moved from Stratford to Birmingham or something, but
Well,
I mean, not within London.
Birmingham's not on the Underground yet.
No, I know.
Yeah, but there you go.
You take the point that I'm.
I do take the point, but in every railway company that we work with, we've got these flexibility and movement agreements, how far you can be moved, what your home station is, and all the rest of it. And when you're working in an environment that is very unsocial in terms of the hours and the shift commitments, being moved around like that on an ad hoc basis, and it can happen every day. It's not like you've got to go over to Earls Court from Stratford and stay there.
So
could be then moved up to another location at another extremity of the line.
And could there be an example where, say, somebody's working, I mean, I don't know when the shift patterns start, but say it's 6 a.m. and...
Well, it tends to be earlier than that, much earlier.
Yeah, but that's the point I'm making, that if they are earlier than that, they've got no way of getting to where they've got to go.
Well, this is one of the problems, and there are provisions for getting there. There are night buses and all sorts of stuff, but it is inconvenient and it makes your life very disrupted.
Is it worth calling people out on strike, though, to do
Well,
that? I mean, are the negotiations really at such a point where strike action is the only option?
Well, our members have been in discussion, and our reps have been in discussion with the company for a long period. There are other aspects to this, such as the pensions reform, as they would put it, that they want to bring in, which is to basically cut the pension accrual and make you poorer in retirement. So this is an aspect of it, but this aspect isn't moving forward. They've shelved some of the pension components, so it's not a combine-wide, as we call it, a system-wide dispute. They're pushing forward with the station proposals, and our members find that unacceptable.
Let's look at the national picture now, because you're threatening a national strike. You've had a strike ballot. 89% of those who voted in favour of it, 11% against. I mean, the turnout, am I right in thinking the turnout was 71%? Which,
yes.
I mean, that's quite high for a union strike ballot,
It's better than most MPs and certainly better than most councillors. We wouldn't have a councillor in this country.
No, but it's also better than most trade unions, because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but lots of, we don't have a huge amount of strikes in this country anymore, but when we have seen strike ballots in the past, there have been turnouts of 25% and then 52% agree to the strike. And I think a lot of people think that's sort of not really very understandable. But this one, it's a big turnout and a huge majority. Now, on the national level, what are the issues there, and why do your members feel so strongly about them?
So again, arising from COVID, the funding is due to be cut. And we accept the government has supported the railway, but it had to, because the railway has to run. It moves goods, it moves people. And our people work through COVID. I'm not going to get the violins out, but railway workers are not the type of people that can sit in their bedroom doing online marketing or whatever.
I thought you were saying presenting a radio show
exactly.
for a minute.
Yeah, they have to be at the workplace dealing with the public. And their reward for that now is to say, well, we're going to cut thousands of jobs, and I do mean thousands of jobs. We're going to change your conditions in a very fundamental way. And again, that will go into unsocial hours, working heavily intense night patterns, weekends and all the rest of it, almost without limitation. And on top of that, we've got a position where many of our members have not had a pay rise for 3 years. Some of them 2 years. We're going into the third anniversary for many of those companies. And inflation, as you know, is rampant at the moment, as part of what's been going on today in Parliament. But 11.1%, the retail price index was last week. Now, not all of our negotiations are dependent on that figure because we've got different anniversaries, but inflation is rocketing. And you'll come back to me in a minute telling me how much train drivers are paid, but the vast majority...
I haven't mentioned it.
But you'll get there in the end, as we know. Everyone does. But so I'll beat you to the punch. The vast majority of our people are moderately paid. They're paid 25, 30K for a heavy social commitment. They are struggling like everyone else. And we think, and they think, obviously because of the turnout, they deserve a pay rise. But the issue at the heart of it is job security. We don't want those jobs stripped out. We don't want a railway that is depopulated and become slightly dystopian with no staff on the railways, no staff on the platforms. You can't buy a ticket, and it becomes a mugger's paradise, which did happen in the 80s in London before Mayor Livingston restaffed the stations. So we don't want that happening. We want our people to have secure employment, which is one of our ambitions as a trade union. We think we can reach a settlement with the companies. We've got a strong mandate, but we'll use that responsibly in order to get a settlement to all the issues that are at stake.
And what's the deadline for this? Because obviously the employment legislation or the trade union legislation means that a strike ballot is only valid for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, that's changed. We used to have to take strike action within 28 days, and that's changed last year. They put higher thresholds in as part of last year or the year before. We've got 6 months to put action on, but obviously, from my point of view, tactically, I'll be honest with you, if you don't keep some energy in a dispute, you're going to lose some of that momentum to get towards a deal. So we're meeting next week, our executive committee, and we'll review where we are. And if we need to put some dates down, we will do that. And it will be probably before the end of June, I would have thought.
The fact that passenger numbers are still 25% below where they were before the pandemic, do you not see from a management point of view that they have to take some sort of remedial action? The government say taxpayers have contributed £16 billion to keep the railways running through the pandemic. Not a single railway worker lost their job during the pandemic, according to the government, unless you tell me otherwise. It can't keep running at this level without some sort of reform, and inevitably that might involve job losses.
Well, we haven't said there won't be reform. We've been living with modernisation, digital technology. We've had steam, then we had diesel, then we had electrification, and now we've all got the visitation of the iPad and all sorts of digital technology that will come in. And we're not saying that can't happen. We must go back to paper tickets and all the rest of it. But the change must happen in a negotiated framework, in good order, where our people get some guarantees, and in return, change will come. So, I'm not a Luddite. Our members aren't Luddites. They change all of the time. And it's been a factor in our industry forever. So there will be change, but we want it to be negotiated. What they're saying at the moment is that we must do this immediately, and the job cuts, the notices could be issued immediately. And the P&O experience, which my union dealt with directly, has given us quite a severe...
With my support, I should remind you.
Exactly, and many people were shocked right across the country. But it has given us a lesson that if we're not ready, then we're disarmed, frankly. We weren't expecting that of P&O. Maybe we were naive. When that happened on March the 17th, a day dear to my heart, because it's normally my best day of the year, the next day we were in to negotiate change with P&O. They've got 2 new vessels coming. All that technology issues, the old vessels were going. Rather than go in and negotiate with us, they dumped all our people on the dole queue and broke the law. Now, I don't think the railway employers will do that. That's not their style. We've got long relationships with them going back more than 100 years in some cases. So I'm determined to get a settlement, but our members are impatient. They're impatient to get a pay rise. I mean, some people won't like that, but it is a fact of life. And we can't have compulsory redundancies just being visited upon us when we've got the chance to negotiate change.
Well, you've heard Mick put his case for these strikes. Want to get your reaction. If you want to put your point of view to him, maybe you are a commuter and you think, hang on a minute, I've only just got back on the trains and we're facing strikes already. That is not the way to pay back the travelling public. Or maybe you support Mick in his efforts to negotiate a new deal with the employers, not just on pay, but on pensions guarantees, and all the sorts of things that we've heard him talk about over the past 10 minutes or so. 0345 6060 973. What sort of impact will these strikes have on your life? You can text your question to 84850 if you can't ring us up. It is 18 minutes past 7 on LBC.
This is LBC. Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
7:20 on LBC. We have Mick Lynch with us, General Secretary of the RMT. If you have a question for him, the number to call 0345 6060 973. What sort of impact will these strikes have on your life? And if there's any question about the strikes you'd like to put to him, now is your opportunity. Just before we go to your calls, though, one of the things that I think, when I've done phone-ins on this sort of issue before, some people accuse the rail unions of reaching for a strike almost as the first knee-jerk reaction, which we don't see in other industries. Why is it that there seem to be more strikes on the railways than any other sector of society?
Well, I think it's because we're well organised and we can motivate our people. We haven't jumped the gun or overreacted. We've been talking about this to the rail employers and indeed at some levels at minister level for nearly 2 years since COVID first came in, because they immediately used this idea that they had to cut funding and they wanted reform. And the RMT's got a profile, railway workers have a profile, and I think they've got us in their crosshairs to some extent. I understand that. But we're assertive. We're not afraid to use our power, if you want to put it that way, to use our influence to protect our people. And people say, oh, you're overpaid, or you've got these pensions, you've got sick pay. Well, there's a reason for that, because in areas where workers can't defend themselves, in non-union areas or areas where the unions are weak or can't use industrial relations in the way that we do, they have been exploited and people have lost money over a long period of time. Many people are now working for subcontractors, working in the gig economy, working casualised 0 hours, and that's because they haven't had a union to protect them. We've kept our stuff, our agreements, because we've defended them vigilantly.
But we're in 2022, not 1972, and I think a lot of people feel that it's sort of a 1970s reaction to automatically threaten a strike, maybe before negotiations have been exhausted.
It's not been automatic. I've been talking to all of the top people in the industry today for hours on end. I've spent hours...
I thought you were looking a bit bleary-eyed.
Yeah, exactly. I've been talking to the high-ups, the top people in this industry, for nearly 2 years on these issues. And it hasn't gone away. They've got an agenda where they insist, and the government's telling them, you must strip thousands of railway workers' jobs out of the system. And if you can't do it with the cooperation of the RMT, you're going to have to confront them and issue consultation notices and statutory redundancy notices to get them out of our industry.
Do you accept that there will need to be some job losses?
There will be change, and there will probably be reductions.
Not quite what I asked.
Well, I'll give you a fuller answer. There will be change, and there will probably be reductions in employment, which has been the case since 1948. We had 500,000 members virtually in 1948. Today we've got 80,000. Now, that's not a very happy history in some ways, but you had to have millions of tonnes of coal on the network at one stage, and obviously you don't need it today. Digital technology is going to take over from paper technology in the way that people buy their tickets and buy their travel. We recognise that. So there will be change. But we want it in a constructive arrangement where people can stay in the industry if that's where they want to be. And we can transform it mutually.
Ready for the calls?
Yep.
Kay's in Fleet. Hello, Kay.
Hi. Hi. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I guess I'm just trying to figure out what is the point of this strike when you're inconveniencing the consumers? Because what I can only see that what you're trying to achieve is you want to make the consumers go to our MPs and say, give you guys what you want. Or if we don't do anything, then the government is not going to really listen to you. And all you've done is just make the consumers a bit more angry at what you've done. So I'm just trying to understand, what are you trying to achieve by inconveniencing all the consumers?
Well, my aim isn't to inconvenience consumers and passengers, customers. My aim is to convince the companies to change course. And it's an unfortunate economic fact of life that the only way that many companies and indeed governments listen to workers and their organisations is through exerting some kind of pressure. I don't want a strike. I don't want my members to be on strike and losing their wages, which is what happens. But it is a record that we've got, that we have been able to defend our members and defend what we've negotiated over decades more than perhaps people in other industries. Now, if we can get a negotiated settlement, I would be the happiest person in this problem to reach it and get to a solution where the passengers and the economy is not affected and my members are not adversely affected in the way that is unacceptable to them. But I cannot just sit round and say we're cutting jobs, we're cutting your we're cutting your means of earning a living, and on top of that, we're going to cut your pension, which you saved up for, which was a promise that you were given when you made that employment, and they're going to change all your contracts. It's a mutual thing, having a contract of employment, and it should be negotiated rather than imposed.
So if your members actually do end up going on strike, do you end up with a reduced salary as well?
I could do. I got a reduced salary last year. My salary was cut by 20% last year. So if my national executive or our AGM deems that I will not be paid, I won't be paid. I get instructed by
You don't
by the
voluntarily.
members. That may happen if it's a continue. But we have disputes in quite a lot of areas, in a lot of places. I would end up maybe not having a salary at all, which might please some people.
I mean, you earn $124,000 a year,
No, I
according
don't.
to the Times.
Well, they're wrong. My salary is £84,100. If you take the tax, the national insurance that's paid, you take the pension contributions and other bits and bobs, that's what they call a remuneration package. How much do you earn a year, Ian?
None of your business.
Well, exactly. But it's all my salary is everybody's business.
Well, I think
It's
it is a bit
but it
different
is
if you're
84
a trade union leader, isn't it?
Well,
What,
it's-
84,000 gross or net?
It's 84,000 before tax. Yeah.
Before tax.
My
okay.
salary, yeah.
All right. Right. Kay, do you want
I'm
to
very
come
happy
back?
with my salary, by the way.
I'm glad you
No,
are.
the thing I'm trying to get at is, yes, he's trying to exert. But I understand where you're coming from. You're protecting your members. But if I'm not going to make a fuss with, say, my MP, which is Jaredine, if I'm not going to make a fuss with him, he's not going to make a fuss with Boris or the government. And so you guys, what? You're going to have another strike and another strike, until you get something. Then you will just inconveniencing us again and again and again. So I don't see what your point is.
Well, my point is to protect my members. That's the job of a trade union. That's why people join trade unions, because by organising collectively and in unity, you can get a better result than standing on your own. So if we didn't have a trade union on the railway, they could go to every employee and say to them, you will get this wage, which we deem to be appropriate. You'll get these conditions, you'll work these hours, and you'll get these holidays. And you probably won't get a pension at all. So we join together in order to get a better result than we could on our own. That's what
Do you not
collective
though
action
feel
is.
that you kind of owe the travelling public one? That after the pandemic, that where £16 billion of taxpayers' money was kept the railways afloat, not a single job was lost. And I think many people who use the transport network, the rail network every day, will feel that this is a kick in the teeth for them.
Well, it might be a kick in the teeth. That subsidy was given to run the railway, and my members worked to their terms and conditions and ran that railway, while all their managers were sitting at home making these decisions about cutting their jobs. Now, they got paid their handsome salaries. People at the top of this industry get paid millions of pounds a year, and that's not an exaggeration, each.
I don't, by the way, just in
No,
case you
good.
wondered.
Glad to hear it. You're still in touch with the people. People are getting money. Last year, the worst year of revenue on the railway ever because of the pandemic, the railway companies, just the core ones, made £500 million in profit. The rolling stock licensing companies, which nobody ever hears of, Eversholtz and all the rest of it, they made £200 million of profit, and they got paid for every single diagram, as we call it, timetable journey, despite the fact that nobody was on them. The Network Rail subcontractors made £200 million profit. And the train operating companies, the private ones, made £100 million worth of profit. So this subsidy is being leached by the private operators. Since privatisation, they've taken more than £10 billion out of the railway industry. Now, I think that's wrong, because I think the railway should be run for the people and for the economy, and now for the climate, so that we can have an integrated transport policy. And I would want no profit extracted from it, because it should be a service, and we should have low fares and high standards. That's not what's happening. They're still taking their profits out, but they're expecting my members to pay the price of that over the next period.
Okay, a text here says, I'm not a supporter of the strikes or the RMT, but good, honest debate is great. Someone else says, how refreshing to have a presenter allowing balanced debate. 10 out of 10, Ian, you're a legend. Thank you very much. John says, do me a favour. Why would I want to listen to Mick Lynch? People are struggling on minimum wage, inflation at 9%, people can't feed their kids, and he wants his members to strike, so he will make me rage. Rob says, how is it fair that because rail is key infrastructure, it can be held hostage, whereas many workforces don't have a hostage? I'm all for better conditions, but rail customers shouldn't be their football. Well, we'll take more of your calls in a minute. 0345 6060 973. It's 7:30 on LBC News Headlines with Amelia Cox.
Every household will get £400 off their energy bills from October. The Chancellor says the most vulnerable households will also receive a £650 payout as part of measures to tackle the cost of living. Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey has been charged with 4 counts of sexual assault against 3 men in the UK. The claims date back to 2005 and run up to 2013. And the UK now has 90 monkeypox cases. The first ones were confirmed in Wales and Northern Ireland earlier. There have been a further 8 in England and 2 in Scotland. LBC weather dry and clear for much of England and Wales tonight. Some isolated showers in northern England, Northern Ireland and southern Scotland, a low of 6 degrees.
This is LBC. LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
It is 7:33 on LBC. Mick Lynch from the RMT is with us taking your calls. You just wanted to come back on something I read out there earlier.
Yeah, it's one of the texts. There is this notion that every time we're involved in a problem, that if we don't get what we're asking for, or a part of what we're asking for instance, a pay rise, that somehow the government or the employers are going to transfer that money to low-paid workers. What they will do if we don't get a pay rise is just increase their profits. And I think what everybody needs in this country at the minute is a pay rise, and the government is looking at that to some extent. But what we really need is better wages. We need a better wage economy. And it's the lowest paid people that need the trade unions the most. And if they'd had them, they'd have had a better chance of sustaining that. And I just think there's too much inequality in this society. The rich are getting richer all the time. And the people providing our care services in the care homes, cleaning our streets, emptying the bins, are just being ripped off. Now, my people aren't quite in that position, but there's a danger we could slide there if we don't hold on to what we do. But it's just a bit of a fallacy that somehow a railway worker being poorer is going to make a care worker richer. It's just not going to happen.
Right, let's go to another call. It's David in Chigwell. Hi, David.
Yeah, sure. Good evening.
Hi.
I just wanted to call up because I've always admired this union. They have been there 100% for many, many years, right from the 70s, for their workers. Whilst all the other unions that used to have some sort of clout seem to have just vanished in the background. They have no teeth, they have no main support for their members, and they don't stand up for their members. I listen to all the strikes, and I think that they're not just like the National Union of Miners. They just want more and more money, but they want the right thing for their members. And I just support them 100%. And believe it or not, I am conservative, but I still support them 100%.
Well, what do you mean about other unions don't really have the teeth? I think Unite might take issue with that. I know my friend Dave Ward from the CWU would take issue with that.
Well, when did they last go on strike to...
Well, it's not all about striking, is it? Is it?
No, it's about achieving for their members what the members need and what the members deserve. If there have been, I'm sure that there have been many times that their union members have not been treated properly, and they have not 100% been behind them. Whereas the Transport Union has always been there.
Mick?
Well, thanks for that. I mean, I don't want to do down other unions, but it is more difficult for other unions. I mean, if you're a healthcare union, it's difficult to say we're going to go out and leave the hospital or the care home unstaffed. And in many ways, that's what the TUC should be for. And we had previously national bargaining. We had councils that looked after people, and there'd be more broader settlements. But there is a bit of dog eat dog in every sector for itself. And we do have a bit of a unique selling point and some power. I recognise that. I would like there to be more general settlements across the piece where, rather than looking for benefits changes, we actually said care workers need a set of conditions that are, even if they're subcontracted, are common to all care companies so they can't undercut each other. And that's what trade unionism used to be about. And some employers used to recognise that. I think before the Big Bang, when there were a bit more paternalistic companies around and you had far more benefits from working for certainly for larger companies. And I think some UK companies have lost sight of that. And it is about stripping out as much as you can, lowering your costs no matter what. And I don't want to be dewy-eyed about it, but there was a more of a balance between the way companies approach things in the past.
But was that a bit of a dig at the TUC that you made that?
Well, I do think the TUC needs to assert itself because there are many people in this country who don't even know what it is. When you and I were kids, the TUC used to be covered live on the telly for 3 or 4 days. I mean, I know that's a bit boring, but who wants to go back to that? But it just shows the decline of influence, and they've become more of a lobby group and a policy group. It's almost like a policy centre than a campaigning group.
Frances O'Grady from the TUC, she's retiring at the end of the year. What kind of person do you think should replace her? Because, I mean, you're effectively saying that she's been a bit toothless.
I think we need a campaigner, and I think we need to go back to what's called the red wall areas, blue wall areas now. And I think many working class people have lost some values. They don't really know what to believe in, and some of it is counterintuitive.
They're believing in, or the last election, they were believing in the Conservative Party, weren't they?
Exactly, but it's not always going to deliver. And some of the politics in this country has become slightly peculiar because you've got a tax and spend Tory party and a Labour Party that can't really find its message. And I think the message has got to be that we want secure employment. We want council housing that's good quality. We want a proper education system. We want to lift everyone. And I think some of the values that we set the union movement up and the Labour movement up, which was real reform through the municipal authorities, people that are really in contact with their local communities, because you were elected as a councillor in your area and you wanted to change it. You wanted to build things, make the environment better, clean the streets, get rid of sewage and all that. I know it's fairly drastic, but I do think we've lost a connection and values.
Right, let's go to another call. It's Stephen, who's a new caller in Glasgow. Stephen, hi, what would you like to ask Mick?
Hi, good evening, Iain, and good evening, Mick.
Good
Just
evening.
want to congratulate you on returning such a good ballot for your members, a good positive result, a good return. I'm a signaller for Network Rail, based in Scotland, and I've been reading a lot in the media. Everyone seems to be focusing on people's salaries, what they make. And I just want to say that there is good salaries in the rail industry, but it's always the P60 figures that's published. It's always the top end. You've earned overtime, etc. Now, during the COVID pandemic, we're running with staff shortages, as we always are basically in the rail industry, with people working 5, 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts every other day for a year and a half. And that's why the salaries that are put into the mainstream media look chunky, they look overinflated. They're not taking realistic figures into account when these figures are actually published.
Yeah, it's a good point, Stu. And in effect, many of our people do more than one person's job because the railways are understaffed. Some people can't handle the culture of the railway because it's very intense in shifts, and they can't always get people to take these highly responsible jobs such as signalling, which are really, really stressful with high-speed trains and the congestion around the big cities that's involved. And our people should be properly rewarded. I mean, it's a very responsible job, even in some of the lower-paid jobs. And often they have to live on overtime to make a living because the salaries aren't that exciting on their own. And we could put an argument, rather than get rid of jobs, why don't we all work on a basic wage that we can all live without overtime? But the companies aren't intent on doing that. In Scotland, they probably need 25% more train drivers. There are signalling vacancies all over the Network Rail network, but they're telling us we've got to take thousands of jobs out. It doesn't make any sense to me. What they really mean, I think, is they want to go to subcontracting and get the work done in a different way so that they're not in a direct employment relationship with the people doing the work.
What's wrong with that?
Well, because it undermines people, it exploits them. You don't get any terms and conditions, you've got no security. And I think it's really unsettling a big proportion of the British population. If you go to a lot of working class towns, former industrial towns, the work is really precarious, doing a lot of this delivery work, the van work, being paid piece rates. You get whatever it is, 90p, £1.10 a packet. They work the guts out of you. And it's not fair because people have been exploited and they haven't got anyone there to stop it, and they haven't got the organisational ability and the traditions anymore to stand up for that. That's the stuff we were fighting against in the Victorian times. That's why my union came into being, super exploitation. And I fear that we're going back towards it. And people like Jeff Bezos will not countenance having a union in any of his workplaces worldwide. And there's a good reason for that, because he's making billions of pounds. So he can fly his super phallus up to the limits of the environment and come back down again and say, look, how well I did. This kind of billionaire lifestyle, which is being promoted as some kind of good thing rather than the benevolence and the paternalistic approach that many rich people used to have, is not a good thing for our society. But it's on the backs of people who are being exploited.
OK, here's an anonymous text. I'm a railway worker, non-RMT member. What makes my colleagues feel entitled to a pay rise? My sister is an NHS nurse. She hasn't had a sniff of a pay rise. I spent most of lockdown on call at home being paid 100% of my wages. How on earth do I deserve a rise? To say that RMT members aren't Luddites is frankly laughable, outdated and vastly deluded. I won't be on strike, and I'm proud to stand up for the bigger picture. 99% of people are struggling, not just those who, by the way, haven't been furloughed or lost a penny in the last 2 years.
Well, he's entitled to his opinion. He's obviously hostile to the RMT. There are people in the railway like that. They tend to be managers. A lot of them are white-collar workers. He was able to work through. Most of our members, the people that we represent, which are generally the blue-collar side of it, don't have that privilege. They weren't furloughed because they had to go to work. They had to go out in the track. They had to go into the stations. They had to drive the trains and clean the trains. And they're tired of it. So I don't know what this person earns. I don't know what their circumstances are. But my members that are the lower paid end are tired of it, and they want a rise. They also want to have a job. That's what they're after. If you haven't got a job, I can't get you a pay rise because you won't be earning any money. So that's the key to this, that we get change once job security is assured, and then we can move on to the other issues. But if he doesn't want to participate in my union, or she doesn't, that's their choice.
Now, if you think that text was a bit aggressive, pin your ears back for this one
Okay.
from Neil in Hornsey. Have you gone stark raving mad, Ian, having that union idiot on? Me and my family have several rail trips over the summer and concert and theatre bookings. If this idiot disrupts those events, I'll personally visit him where he works, and I know where that is. And boy, will I have something to say to him. And you're letting on all the commies of the day. You've lost it, mate. The railway has lost customers and will lose more. Massive amounts of money has improved our rail system, and you're giving this idiot a platform.
Well, I don't think I'm an idiot. You probably might agree with me that I'm not an idiot.
I do agree that you're not an idiot. I said the other day, we did an hour's phone-in on the strikes the other day, and I did actually say in that phone-in that I thought that your union had actually done a terrific job for its members in terms of, I mean, not just the drivers, because the drivers always seem to get the headlines, as you pointed out earlier on. But I think Neil in Hornsey thought we were both idiots, frankly.
Yeah. Well, maybe I am an idiot. I don't know. How can you tell?
Do you know, I've just realised who you sound like.
Who?
Stephen Pound. You know, former Labour MP.
Well, he was my MP for a long time.
Well, there you go. From the same part of the country. Right, we are going to take a short break, and then we're going to take more of your calls. 0345 6060 973. It's 7:45.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Will Walden knows Boris Johnson better than most. He was communications director, led the transition team at 10 Downing Street. A lot of drinking, a lot of partying, the head of ethics supplying the karaoke machine. Does that mean he should quit?
I'm divided on that. What I would say is it's not a matter for me. But if he's going to survive into the future, he's got to stop saying that we need to move on. This is his mess. It's no one else's mess. That's the truth of it. And you lead first and foremost by understanding that and doing something about it. Where are the grown-ups? Is he running a country or is he running a frat house?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Britain's Conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
Mick Lynch from the RMT is with us. A tweet here from Joshua who says, can you join the RMT if you're self-employed on the railway?
Yes, you can. We're developing a number of self-employed people who come in. It's difficult to organise because obviously they work for themselves. They're not covered by a lot of the legislation. But we've very successfully organised the deep sea divers in the North Sea, and they are all self-employed. and we've got a national agreement for them, and they've got a unique set of circumstances. But we are having to look at that, and the whole union movement will have to look at self-employment and limited companies and all that kind of stuff that's coming into the world of work. It's a challenge, but it's not going to go away, so we have to adapt to it.
Right, let's go to Nick, who's a new caller in Streatham. Hello, Nick.
Hi, Mick, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, I'm an RMT member at Network Rail, and as usual, we've heard the bosses say, well, there are two main excuses. There's no money, and we need to modernise. But it seems to me that you can't modernise by cutting safety-critical and conditions. And rather, the railways, they need massive investment, but these hundreds of thousands of pounds that are going to the private companies, they're not investing them in the railways in real modernisations. It's highly parasitic. And in that case, if the Tories claim that there's no money, shouldn't they firstly take over the profits, these profits for public funding, renationalise the railways, and let rail workers themselves control the budget rather than attacking us?
Yeah, well, workers' ownership might be a thing if they control the budget. But I do think they should speak to the staff more directly. And if you're looking for efficiencies and better ways of working, in a non-threatening way, it should be based on what the staff think. Because there is a lot of inefficiency in Network Rail. There's bad planning. Lots of work gets cancelled for reasons that are beyond the workers' control. So sometimes there is idle time because they haven't planned what they want to do in the right way. But they are changing the safety-critical nature. They are planning to cut 50% of what are called maintenance standard tasks. That's the inspections out on track. Because if they don't do that, they can't cut the job. So they're changing their safety case, they're changing the safety regime as a means to an end. If they change that and they get it approved, then they can cut at least 2,500 jobs in the maintenance teams that are out there already without the work going away. So they've got a lot of problems, and we're not. That's one of the reasons we won't accept their rationale. And we think all those workers are needed, and you can't be over-vigilant in safety. And there's a danger we slide back to the days of rail track, where they subcontracted everything out and allowed the standards to slip, and that led to many of those fatalities that we had in the 90s.
Nick, thank you very much. Let's move on to Zane in Dunstable. Hi, Zane.
Hi, Ian. Thank you very much. It's always nice to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to put a very clear point. I'm a taxpayer. I have bailed Network Rail now and in the past and maybe also in the future. And I'm totally understanding when the increase of the pay for everybody in Network Rail, they will still pay their tax in this country and it will come back in the same circle. I'm a taxpayer. I bailed the bankers a few years ago. Nobody holding them to account. Their money is all outside the country. It's never going to come back into the same circle. The government, especially this government, always do exactly the same trick. When it comes to the average person and pay rises for the people who actually work, no chance. But they're not taxing the energy companies. They're not taxing the bankers anymore. They will allow them to go away with millions.
They are.
Millions.
I mean, to be fair, they are taxing the bankers. I mean, it's don't you remember the bankers' levy as well? Zane, I need you to get to your question.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to make it clear that I support the strike, the hands down, and I'm not in the union. I have nothing to do directly with Network Rail, but I support all their actions at the moment.
OK, thank you very much. Text from Andrew in London. Ask Mick how much the railway workers get in pensions on average. I looked at a job at the Department of Work and Pensions, 76,700 salary with a pension with 27.9% employer contributions. You wouldn't get that in the private sector because it's unaffordable. That's why the government doesn't have any money. Council workers, police, teachers all get the same overtly generous pensions funded by everyone else and government borrowing.
Well, they're not funded by the government. The railway pension scheme has never been funded by the government and hasn't had a penny of money going in there. So the employer, we've got a good pension scheme and I'm very proud of it, and we've kept it going when most of them have gone. But it's entirely self-funded. So the employer puts a contribution and the worker puts a contribution.
What's the percentage?
It's varied because we've now got 100 sections. So typically it would be 10% from the worker and 15% from the employer. At the moment. But there's a lot of ranges, but I'm just giving you a sort of median figure. That is in return for not very high wages. I mean, I've got to make this point. The median wage on the railway of our members is 31,000, and that's normally for very heavy shift commitment. And if you put 40 years into the railway, which many of them have done historically, you will get a reasonable pension based on about 2/3 of your final salary. That's a decent deal, and I think it would help a lot of people if they also had those deals. What has been stripped out over the last 30 years, Ian, and you'll know this, occupational pensions have been stripped out of most workplaces, which really secured people in their old age. And we wouldn't be having to use a lot of these benefit structures that Gordon Brown started to supplement things if the employers had kept that deal of running properly funded occupational pension schemes, which do hit their bottom line. You won't make as much profit if you've got a proper pension scheme that you're funding, but you will be fulfilling your commitments to society and your workforce in a really meaningful way until the point that they die.
Right, Robert is in Croydon. Hello, Robert.
Oh, good evening, Ian. And is it Michael? Is it Michael?
Yeah, Michael. My mother called me Michael.
Oh, good evening, Michael. Thank you, Ian. Again, wonderful show, very balanced. Thank you very much for this. I basically would come across as somebody who you would say who would not support unions, but in this aspect, I do. I believe that Mick and his members should strike, and that the public should support them, because I do believe, from my position, that the railways are an essential integrated part of the future of society, to travel, to work, and things need to be cheaper. Positions need to be secured and not outsourced. That's my position, Ian, on that.
Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. I would ask Michael, does he see a risk in the future of the railways being more heavily outsourced, and does he see that as a risk to safety?
Yes, outsourcing is happening all of the time on the railway. The cleaning and much of the catering is outsourced, and it's super exploitation. Much of the engineering and maintenance work is being outsourced, and we haven't been able to stop it. I think that lowers standards, and it makes the whole thing more casual.
What's the evidence for that it lowers standards?
Well, it lowers the standards of the workers because they're all on the minimum wage, whereas they would have had the opportunity to be in our pension scheme, get in our conditions of service.
As a passenger or consumer, how would I notice the difference?
Well, you notice the difference when it was all outsourced under Railtrack, because the infrastructure was completely degraded, and the reason they brought Network Rail back into existence was to get control back of the railway system that was falling to bits when we had the chairman of Woolworths running it.
I just looked at the time and I want to squeeze one more call in. It's Paul in Greenford. Paul, hello.
Hi, first time caller. So
welcome.
I was just driving home from Heathrow Airport, actually. So I don't want to go into too much detail about my present position, but what I would like to say is that I've listened to Mick Lynch. First time I've heard him speak, and I'm thoroughly impressed with his overall explanation of the trade unions. I actually was a shop steward many years ago at Heathrow Airport, and I also was a manager at Heathrow Airport and dealt on the other side with unions. Now, when I first heard about the strike, I thought to myself, oh, not another one. But when I've listened to Mick and his explanation, I can only say that he's convinced me 100% why we're in such a mess in this country. Because we divide and conquer. And we think that the rail union are holding us to ransom and that their workers are getting excellent conditions and etc. Why not? Why shouldn't they be given a good wage? Why should they lose their pension, final salary pension?
Okay, well, I'm going to take that as a rhetorical question, Paul. Thank you very much for your call. We haven't got time to get Sarah from Leeds on the line, but she's saying, is there any reason we're having this communist on? What is this? Ian is usually so balanced. Well, the reason that I have trade union leaders on this programme is because they don't get a voice on most of the rest of the media.
And I'm not a communist.
And he's not a communist. I think you've heard that over the course of the hour. He's certainly not. And I think it's only fair that trade union leaders get the opportunity to put their case forward. Now, I may not agree with it sometimes, but I've been impressed by many of the trade union leaders we've had on the programme. And I'm sorry, Sarah, but we'll probably have a few more over the next few months as well. My producer's just put on the screen, but is he a national disgrace? Because I did call you that in a previous interview, didn't I?
I hope to be. I'm working up to it.
Just final quick question. This is from a union member in Fife. Can you ask, what is the priority for the union? As a member, mine is terms and conditions, job security, pensions and pay rise in that order. We've been asked to vote on a homogenous reason, and I'd like to know Mick's priorities.
Well, our first priority in this is job security. You can't get terms and conditions if you're not working. So we want a framework where people are guaranteed a job if they want to stay. Then we'll move. The conditions are really important to our people. And then we hope to achieve a reasonable pay rise. That's it in a nutshell. The pensions are also important, but they're not quite on the agenda yet.
Mick, thank you very much for coming in. Really enjoyed the hour. And I know from the texts and tweets that are coming in, a lot of our listeners have, even if Sarah in Leeds hasn't. We are going to move on in the next hour. We're going to talk about Rishi Sunak's statement today. Did he do enough? Were you impressed? Do you think he shot Labour's fox with all the different announcements he's made? £15 billion worth of help for people on mainly lower incomes, but not exclusively. Looking forward to your calls and your reaction. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 8 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. Every household in the UK will get £400 off their energy